Iran sent its last 3 combat pilots on a suicide strike against the USS Abraham Lincoln. Not 1, 3. Simultaneously, from 3 separate air bases across 3 different provinces, coordinated to reach the Lincoln from 3 distinct vectors inside a 4-minute window: north, east, west. 3 F-4 Phantoms, 3 pilots, 3 explosive payloads ranging from 600 to 900 kilograms each, and a level of coordination designed specifically to overcome the problem that had destroyed Lieutenant Colonel Sajjadi 48 hours earlier. Sajjadi had attacked alone. The Ford's defense systems had detected him at 194 kilometers and vectored 2 Super Hornets to intercept him with more than enough time to spare. A single attacker against 5 layers of defense never had a realistic chance. 3 attackers from 3 simultaneous vectors was an entirely different tactical problem. Not because the F-4s were impossible to intercept, they were still obsolete 1960s airframes with massive radar cross-sections and speeds that any Super Hornet on combat air patrol could exceed with ease. But because intercepting 3 attackers from 3 simultaneous vectors required distributing defense resources across 3 separate engagements executed in parallel. And the moment those resources were divided, the probability that at least one of the 3 attackers would reach closer to the Lincoln than any individual attacker could have reached increased dramatically. All 3 pilots knew this. They had been briefed before takeoff. They knew all 3 of them would be destroyed before reaching the Lincoln. They had accepted it. What they wanted was for at least one of the 3 to get close enough that the debris from his destruction would reach the carrier's hull. Not a direct impact, fragments. The difference between Sajjadi's video watched across 67 countries and something more, something the world could see in satellite imagery as actual damage to the hull of the Abraham Lincoln, caused by an Iranian pilot. To understand why 3 simultaneous attackers from 3 separate vectors created a tactically more complex problem than one, you have to understand how the Lincoln allocated its combat air patrol resources. At any given moment, the Lincoln maintained between 4 and 6 F-18E and F Super Hornets on combat air patrol, distributed across coverage sectors surrounding the carrier strike group. With a single attacker, 2 Super Hornets could be vectored toward it while the rest of the patrol maintained general coverage. With 3 simultaneous attackers from north, east, and west, the 6 Super Hornets on patrol would have to be split into 3 groups of 2 to cover each vector simultaneously. That meant each attacker faced only 2 Super Hornets instead of 6, and if any one of the 3 managed to delay or survive its intercept, there was no reserve available for reinforcement. Iran had calculated that the 3rd attacker, the one approaching from the west, from the least expected direction and on the lowest flight profile, had the highest probability of reaching the closest distance to the Lincoln. That calculation was correct. Because what happened in the 4 minutes between the detection of those 3 F-4s and the outcome of the 3rd pilot is the most complex and most human air defense sequence in the entire naval conflict in the Persian Gulf. At 5:44 in the morning, the Lincoln's SPY-6 radar detected 3 airborne contacts simultaneously. Northern F-4, 188 kilometers out, altitude 400 meters, speed 670 kilometers per hour. Eastern F-4, 203 kilometers out, altitude 350 meters, speed 640 kilometers per hour. Western F-4, 176 kilometers out, altitude 80 meters, speed 710 kilometers per hour. The 3rd pilot, the one on the western vector, was flying at 80 meters altitude, significantly lower than the other 2. Harder to track continuously at that altitude over water, and faster. The Lincoln's tactical action officer distributed the combat air patrol in 8 seconds. 2 Super Hornets vectored north, 2 east, 2 west. All 6 Super Hornets accelerated toward their assigned contacts. At 5:51, the first Super Hornet reached engagement position on the northern F-4 at 95 kilometers from the Lincoln. Standard protocol, warning broadcast on all emergency channels. The northern pilot responded in Farsi. Then silence. AIM-120 AMRAAM launched at 5:52 and 14 seconds. Northern F-4 destroyed at 5:52 and 58 seconds, 88 kilometers from the Lincoln. The first pilot died at 5:52 and 58 seconds. At 5:53, both Eastern Vector Super Hornets reached the Eastern F-4 at 107 kilometers from the Lincoln. The Eastern pilot did not respond to the warning. He transmitted nothing. He simply held his course. AIM-120 launched at 5:53 and 2 seconds. Eastern F-4 destroyed at 5:54 and 8 seconds, 99 kilometers from the Lincoln. The second pilot died at 5:54 and 8 seconds. The third pilot, on the western vector at 80 meters altitude, had used the 10 seconds consumed by the other two engagements to reduce his altitude to 40 meters and push his speed to 740 kilometers per hour. At 5:54 and 12 seconds, he was 61 kilometers from the Lincoln. The two Western Vector Super Hornets had been vectored from a farther starting position because the western contact had been detected last due to the lower flight altitude that made continuous tracking more difficult. They were 44 kilometers from the Western F-4 in the opposite direction from the Lincoln. To intercept the Western F-4 before it closed to 20 kilometers from the Lincoln, the Super Hornets needed to reach it within the next 90 seconds. At 740 kilometers per hour, the F-4 covered 206 meters per second. 90 seconds, 18.5 kilometers the F-4 would cover while the Super Hornets accelerated toward it from 44 kilometers away. The Super Hornets at maximum afterburner, Mach 1.6, covered those 44 kilometers in approximately 55 seconds. 55 seconds to reach the F-4, which needed 90 seconds to close to 20 kilometers from the Lincoln. 35 seconds of margin. Enough, mathematically. The first Western Vector Super Hornet launched its AIM-120 at 5:55 and 4 seconds, from 18 kilometers distance to the Western F-4. The F-4 was 34 kilometers from the Lincoln. The AIM-120 needed 22 seconds to reach the F-4 at that closing speed. At 5:56 and 6 seconds, the AIM-120 detonated 4.8 meters from the Western F-4. It was not a direct kill. The AIM-120's fragmentation warhead sent shrapnel through the F-4's fuselage, destroying the right engine and the hydraulic flight control system. The F-4 lost partial control but kept flying. At 740 kilometers per hour, with one engine and without full hydraulic control, the Western F-4 entered a sequence of gradual control loss. It did not fall immediately. It continued in a regular flight, losing altitude progressively over 8 additional seconds. 8 seconds at 740 kilometers per hour was 1.6 kilometers of additional forward travel. The F-4 impacted the sea at 5:56 and 14 seconds, 22 kilometers from the USS Abraham Lincoln. 22 kilometers. The detonation of 800 kilograms of explosive aboard the F-4 upon water impact generated a fireball visible from the Lincoln's bridge. No damage to the Lincoln. No casualties. The third pilot had reached 22 kilometers, closer than Sajati, not close enough. At 5:57, the Lincoln transmitted the engagement report to Central Command. 3 hostile airborne contacts neutralized. Total engagement time, 13 minutes from detection to final impact. Munitions expended, 3 AIM-120 AMRAAMs. No friendly damage, no casualties. The 3 videos that the 3 pilots had recorded before takeoff were broadcast on Iranian television between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. The northern pilot was 38 years old and the father of 4 children. The eastern pilot was 51 years old and the most senior flight instructor at his base. The Western pilot was 29 years old and had left a letter for his mother. The 3 videos were watched a combined total of 180 million times in the following 48 hours. The blockade of the Persian Gulf continued without interruption. The final accounting was this: Iran had sent its last 3 available combat pilots in the theater on a coordinated 3-vector attack designed specifically to overcome the problem that had defeated the individual pilot before them. The 3rd pilot had reached 22 kilometers from the Lincoln, closer than Sajadi had reached. Not close enough to produce damage, but 180 million views of 3 videos in 48 hours was more than any ballistic missile had produced in months of conflict. This story is not about the F-4s or the AIM-120s. It is about the moment when an adversary that has lost all conventional military capability decides to use the only thing it has left. People willing to die for an image, not for an impact, for an image that reaches 180 million screens. Iran had lost the missile war. It had lost the drone war. It had lost the submarine war. The image war was not over yet. Do you believe the 3 Iranian pilots made the right decision, knowing none of them would reach the Lincoln? Or when a country has exhausted every conventional military resource it possesses, does personal sacrifice as an act of resistance carry a logic that transcends the tactical outcome? Leave your analysis in the comments. Real power does not announce itself. It is studied.